Check, check, mic check. Check, check, mic check. Welcome to Podcast Envy. I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder, and today is part 3, I think, of our series on podcasting and imposter syndrome. Are you starting to notice any patterns here yet? You will. Today, I'm talking with Katy Barber of KakeBytes, and KakeBytes, KakeBytes. KakeBytes is a show about the history of video games, and Katy has a pretty crazy story about how some outside influences, nasty trolls, tried to throw her off her podcasting game. Happy to say that she is still producing shows, and I think you're going to be interested in what she has to say. Quick side note that we had some tech issues with recording because she was in the process of moving, and so we had to use a phone recording. It's not ideal in terms of audio quality, and I'm only really saying this because you know what a stickler I am for audio quality, but I think that what she has to say and her story are compelling enough that you will forgive it, right? I knew you would. Oh, hey, want some free coaching from me? You can get it. I'm offering you 5 questions you haven't asked about your podcast. Working with these questions, I promise, will help your podcast become deeper, stronger, and more impactful if you just spend a little time beneath the surface. Share your email at thecreativeimposter.com, and I'll share my coaching questions with you. Please enjoy my conversation with Katy Barber of KakeBytes. Katy Barber, thank you so much for joining me on Podcast Envy.
Thank you for having me.
You have a show that is not necessarily something that I would ever in a million years listen to. But I love having an excuse to listen to shows that would not normally be the thing that I'm looking for. So tell me a little bit about your show.
Yeah. So I totally understand that. That's kind of what's fun about going on other shows too, is shows that I may not have known about. I have an excuse to listen to. But my show, I like to lovingly say that it's my journey through learning about video game history, because I'm 26. So in terms of video games, there's a lot that I just wasn't around for because I wasn't born. And there's a lot of attitudes, and there's a lot of things about the social atmosphere about video games in the 80s and even the 70s and, the 90s from before I was cool enough to really know a lot more about games. There's just a lot that I want to understand. And I've had the opportunity to talk to people who have worked in the industry or know people who work in the industry. And, my show didn't originally intend to be the format that it is now, but it kind of evolved into me getting to just interview people about their place in video game history, what they did, what influenced them, and I just get a chance to talk to them on a personal level about the contributions that they made, and to them, it's not a contribution. To them, it's just a life experience. So I felt like the best way to get that history was straight from the source. So that is my show, KakeBytes. KakeBytes coming from my online handle for games, which is Katy Cakes, and Bytes. I don't know. I just felt like I was able to do a lot with that term with my show. So there's a lot of things like with my Patreon that play off of KakeBytes. I have some other things that I'm going to be using to make more plays on that. So that are going to be an expansion of my podcast as well. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes sense, and it's also memorable. It's not like the video game history show, or something like that.
Yeah. I definitely feel like my show is small. I don't have a ton of listens or whatever. I have quite a few, but not I'm not on any leaderboards or anything like that. I don't have people tweeting at me about my show or anything, but I have people that listen and they enjoy it. And I think that if I had the video game history podcast, that may help me out, but I felt like I wanted to give my show kind of like a unique identity in itself as well. It was important to me.
How did you even get into podcasting in the first place? What was it about podcasting that made you want to start a show?
When I was in college, I worked in a video game store, and I ended up going from part-time to full-time when I was done with school for a little while. And through working in the store, there was a podcaster who would come in to the store. He was a regular customer. He'd been going to the store for, 3 times as long as I lived in the college town. And everybody knew him. He was great. And I hadn't even heard of podcasts really until him. And he was really the person that introduced me to podcasts in general. His name is Eric Gibbs. He is the host of the Father Gamer podcast. And eventually I wore him down through sheer force of will to let me be a co-host on the show for a while. And I was on the show for probably close to a year. And Eric is really responsible for introducing me to people that have benefited my show now. He's really responsible for really helping me move past just being a fan of video games and into trying to do more with games. And trying to do more has led to, I can't say that I've done something, but I feel like I'm trying. And so I was on that show for quite a while. And then, life got busy. I had taken a short break from school and had to go back to school, change jobs, and, life kind of changes. And I stopped guesting on the show, but we were still friends. And I really enjoyed the experience. It took me probably 2 or 3 years before I decided to do my own show, and then that was a whole process in itself. Deciding to want to do a podcast is a lot different than doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another journey in itself.
What would you say has been the most surprising thing about making your own podcast?
The original intent for my show, which when I think about it now, or when I even try to verbalize it, I have a really hard time because it evolved very quickly. It was my initial idea gave me the ability to dig deeper into my interest. And there's a lot of considerations that go into making a podcast. So it's not only do you need to have a good idea, but you have to think about where do I want to take this idea? How can I stretch this idea out? And so originally interviews, which my show is all interviews as it stands, my original intent was to do a scripted show and then have interviews kind of interlaced, at some point, because I didn't really think I was going to be able to get interviews. And then I rolled with that for maybe 2 months. I was working on a script for the first couple of episodes, doing research. And I reached out to the right person, and he introduced me to 3 more people and really got the ball rolling. And I ended up turning my show into a full interview show before, I had a script written. I had a format laid out, and then my format changed last second, and it all ended up working out. I'm a high anxiety person. I'm clinically diagnosed social and generalized anxiety. So really rapid change can really overwhelm me sometimes. I like to feel in control because I think that makes my anxiety worse too. But I like to feel like I'm in control. So even though things were positively changing and my show was evolving into something that I ultimately did want, I wanted a full interview show is what I wanted. So I just learned to just let things happen.
I can imagine that with the anxiety and predictability versus factors that are not within your control, when you do an interview show and you bring other people in, there's so many other factors than if you've got everything planned out and you are doing more of a scripted format, that there is a lot more to leave to chance, right? You don't know how an interview is going to go. You don't know, we just had some tech issues starting out. You don't know, if you move your equipment around and then suddenly your settings get all screwed up and then something isn't working. There's a little bit more pressure sometimes with an interview than if it's just you recording by yourself.
Definitely. And I will say the last 3 interviews I've conducted have been online, and that's just because my guests really were just far away and I had the opportunity to interview them. But all of my previous interviews, probably, off the top of my head, it's probably 8 or 9 people I was able to interview in person. And every single one of those interviews were conducted, in a different place with a different technical setup with right before there was so much anxiety leading up to it. But then no matter what, I ended up enjoying the moment anyway. But I practice mindfulness and I've gone to cognitive behavioral therapy. So I was able to not just be overwhelmed in the moment and just kind of, even when things were going wrong, losing a bag of mics.
Oh, no.
I was on vacation visiting family, but had the opportunity to do a really cool interview, and I lost a bag of nice lavalier mics, which I knew worked well, was a tried and true system of mine. I lost the mics in my travels.
Oh, man. Bad feeling.
I was in Philadelphia, which I live between Houston and Austin in Texas. And so I was in Philadelphia, which I grew up in that area, but I didn't ever drive there. So I spent like 2 hours before my interview at Newgrounds, which is their headquarters. And Newgrounds is a website that's been around since the late 90s. That has really been a big driving force in content creation that was really eclipsed by YouTube. The interview I do with him is really cool. But before that particular interview, I was shopping for these mics, trying to find lav mics that would work in my phone as good as the mics that I had ordered off of Amazon that I knew worked perfectly. And I bought mics and none of them worked. So I ended up just having to have my phone in between us. And, and I felt so bad after that interview. I felt like the interview itself went really well, but I was really focused on the technology aspect of it. And I didn't release that episode, and I didn't listen to the interview.
So you had a long lead time.
Yeah, exactly. My words are lost on me right now. I'm
No worries.
I'm reliving the anxiety of that moment.
No.
But I didn't listen to the interview probably for 2 months. Like, I was so bummed out about it. And then when I went and listened to it, it was great. Like, I mean, I could fix it in Audacity. I mean, it's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, audio-wise. I just had bummed myself out mentally because of the circumstances. And really, that was like the last real low point I had with regards to it. After that, I was like, all right, I need to not be so hard on myself. But learning audio was probably one of the hardest things about starting a podcast.
Won't you be my angel? Ooh, is that copyrighted? The melody? I don't know. It's that podcast angel time again, and I'm hoping that you will consider being an angel and heading over to my Patreon page. What is Patreon? Well, if you go to my Patreon page, you'll find out what Patreon is. Patreon. Search for Andrea Klunder, or you can just simply go to thecreativeimposter.com/support, or click the link that I have so generously included in the show notes for this episode and check out how you can become a podcasting angel by supporting me for just a couple bucks a month. I'm up to some pretty big things and I want to bring you along. I want you to be a part of the Creative Imposter Podcast Envy tribe. So sick of that word. Community? Posse? Whoa. Totally 1990s. I don't know, but I want you along for the ride. Please consider donating a couple dollars a month to help me reach my podcasting goals and continue to provide you with awesome, amazing, wonderful, incredible content. I also am working on figuring out how to fund an extension of my podcast mentoring program that I talked about at Podcast Movement this past July, which is working with high school students with diverse learning challenges to produce their own show. I have some students now who are graduating from my program, and I want to help them keep podcasting even though they can no longer be in my high school program. So I need your help. thecreativeimposter.com/support to learn more. You had reached out when I posted about looking for podcasters who wanted to talk about podcasting and imposter syndrome. And I tend to think of imposter syndrome as not only just self-doubt, but this really deep feeling that somehow it's only a matter of time that everyone's going to figure out that you're a fraud and that you have no idea what you're doing. And I'm wondering what resonates for you about that term. Why did that pique your curiosity and cause you to raise your hand and say, yes, I can definitely talk about this?
Because I feel like the imposter syndrome that I struggle with is multifaceted. And I try to be really upfront. I market my show as my journey through video game history purposefully because I fully embrace the fact that I don't know a lot of things. And the worst thing that anybody could accuse me of is trying to say that I know things that I don't know. And I think my extreme openness to that is because I don't want people to view me as someone trying to be an authority on video game history. I'm more just wanting to unlock aspects of it. Mm-hmm. And I've actually caught flack specifically because I'm young and I don't know a lot. It's a funny story because I worked with an actual video game historian named Patrick Scott Patterson. He's a guest on 2 of my episodes, and he's actually in my first one. And he talks with me about the importance of preservation with regards to video game history because it sounds really absurd and like way more serious than it needs to. And that's what we addressed. So I worked with him at a couple different conventions while I was in the production phase of starting my show. And he has been on the receiving end of a lot of really weird stalking and trolling online to the point where he's had to literally contact the police and file for restraining orders against people because they think that he's lying about video game history, like as absurd as that sounds.
Wow.
So we were tagged in a couple of photos. I was following him around because we were going to be doing an interview for my show at one of these conventions. And we had taken some photos together. And he had shared my photos that I had taken of us. And so I got to realize, and this is the stage, I was not in town. I was about 4 or 5 hours from where I normally live. I was having a really great time with the production of my show. I was visiting with friends I hadn't seen in a while. And I start getting these Facebook messages, like 40 in a row. And it's to my new podcast page. I had made it maybe 3 weeks before. So the messages were something along the lines of like, you look like a pig or something like, really like absurd. And like spamming me with it. And I'm like, what is this? Like, am I making this up right now? Like, and it's like 40 messages in a row. So then somebody started sending my personal Facebook page some messages. They weren't friends of mine. And it was these hyperlinks. And they were to this blog that was dedicated to Patrick Scott Patterson. And it was these blog posts about me and all of the things that are wrong with me physically, in addition to like screenshots of my Facebook, trying to put my IP address on there as if that really does anything, honestly. Anyway, so it was a really lame attempt at trolling, in my opinion. The person who published those and was running that blog is actually somebody that's banned by the classic gaming community.
Wow.
He is very obviously mentally unwell. And it was very terrifying in the moment because I already wasn't trying to say that I was an authoritarian on video game history in any capacity, but I was being accused before I had even released an episode of my show. I was being falsely accused of what I didn't want people to say about me before I did anything, really. And just by virtue of the niche with video games, I stream, or I have streamed. I haven't streamed recently because I get a lot of anxiety about what games I enjoy playing versus what are mainstream popular games to play. People like you run a video game podcast and you care about video game history, but you just love to play Stardew Valley and Ark Survival, like just like one of the games I'm playing right now. Or I'm not great at Overwatch. I like playing Overwatch, but are people going to want to watch me being mediocre at Overwatch? I struggle a lot with putting myself out there because I'm not trying to put myself out there as the best, but I feel like by not actively trying to be the best, it's almost like a sham when I realized that line of thinking, it's not logical and no one said that, but it's very underlying.
Yeah.
The anxiety doesn't really make sense, but it's there.
So when you had that happen with that trolling incident, which like, I don't know, trolling doesn't even sound like the right word. Like that's just flat out bullying. You know what I mean? Did it throw you off? Like, was there a moment of, oh crap, maybe I should not be doing this?
Yeah, definitely. This was around the same time that Scott had to go to the police because somebody was, physically following him. And that was really frightening to me. I was living alone and I just was really worried that somebody was going to come after me for something as petty as, deciding to work with some person that they don't like for my own podcast. That was really absurd to me. And I do consider worst case scenario quite often, but I'm pretty good at writing off worst case scenario. I'm pretty good at that. But in that moment, it felt really real because it wasn't just like one post. There was a second one, and that one had like screenshots of my page. And that was just really creepy to me. My page, for the most part, there's things on it that's public. So should it be creepy to me? I don't know. But the intent was very unsettling. Like it made me feel unsettled.
Mm-hmm. How did you move beyond that and still find the confidence or the guts to move forward anyways?
I had and I still have a really great support system with regards to the production of my show. The network that I've made so far has been really encouraging, and being able to talk and being in contact with people who have dealt with those types of scenarios before is comforting as well. Like it sucks that it happens to people, but at the same time, I feel like that type of behavior is kind of standard when you're putting yourself in the public realm, in the court of public opinion. I feel like that type of behavior is just kind of a fact of the internet, kind of no matter what. And with video games, that is no stranger to an absurd amount of trolls. And it's all about being able to moderate your community and engaging them, whether or not you do. I didn't engage that guy.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to. I really wanted to.
I mean, you're really lucky that you didn't, especially because when it came up, you were you were out and drinking. It's like it would have been really easy to make it worse.
Mm-hmm. I just had to consider what I gained from engaging. I was like, if I don't engage and I just report everything, because he had given me a bunch of 1-star reviews too. And so I was like, if I don't respond, I can probably report those and just get them deleted as spam, right? Part of me was just wanting to delete it so that nobody could see that he had posted on the wall or done the review or anything like that. That was what I was more concerned about. I was unsettled, but I was afraid that for some reason he would have some sort of sphere of influence that would drive some sort of negative horde of angry basement dwelling nerds to 1-star my show and downvote everything forever. When I upload my podcast to YouTube, I do notice that somebody Insta reports every episode of my show, and it gets taken down, but I appeal it and it gets put back up. So
they report it. What does that mean?
People can report stuff on YouTube, for copyright infringement or inappropriate, content, whatever, and their auto moderation is pretty strict.
Yeah.
So stuff will get pulled down pretty quickly. The first video I put up, that was an episode of my podcast, got pulled down literally within 5 minutes of it finishing, uploading, and publishing.
Fascinating.
Right. People don't like my show. That's completely fair. I just wish they would tell me what they don't like.
You are clearly more infamous than I. I've not had any of that stuff happen.
I don't have any idea, honestly. It baffles me, but I assume they're not logical anyways, so I don't really worry about trying to understand it.
Yeah.
I've been online my whole life. My parents had computers. I was born in 91. My parents had a computer in the early 90s. We had, AOL when it came around and got popular, and social media. The time I really was 11 or 12. I guess maybe I've always been trying to portray some sort of optic, about my life in some way.
Okay, I have some short answer questions for you. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Where did you find or get or make the cover art for your show?
I have some friends who had some cool cover art for their podcast. They're the Mind Fudge Comedy Podcast, and they actually also have a comic book company, and I really like their comic book company logo, Gray Bear Comics. And I was like, hey, who did your work? And he passed on, and his name is James Linares. I'm not sure if he's currently even doing work right now. He's a freelance artist, but I hit him up and I gave him literally as little information as possible. I had no idea what I wanted. I gave him some colors and general concepts that I liked, and he came up with my show logo, and I really liked it. Didn't have to change much from his initial concept.
Awesome. Using your network. I love it. Theme music. Where did you find your theme music?
So I did a lot of searching in my early production days, and I found a link to this guy's website either on a Reddit post or in one of the various podcasting groups on Facebook, and it's this guy, Kevin McLeod, I think, and he just literally has all of this music for free on his website, royalty-free music, and I just snagged something that sounded good and cut it up, and there it is.
Nice.
I have credits to it in all of my podcast show notes.
Yes, I think that's super important, especially if somebody's making their music available for free. I think it's really important to credit whoever's contributing to your show. What do you think is your biggest strength as a podcaster?
I am really curious, and I don't know, some people could say that's nosy, but I do like to believe I know when is a good time to be nosy and when is a good time to not be nosy. But that's what makes interviews so fun, is getting to ask somebody a question, and that question is the first time that they've been asked that in an interview setting. That's always a good feeling.
Is there anything that you dislike about podcasting?
Audio editing. Definitely. I mean, I don't actively dislike it. It's just every episode is an adventure. Every guest spot is an adventure with my audio. So, I like knowing what I'm doing and feeling confident. And, I put out a product I'm proud of, but I know it's also a testament to my learning.
Did you have any experience editing audio, or did you learn from scratch when you started making your show?
I learned from scratch.
How did you learn? Did you take a course or just dabbling around or YouTube videos?
So I read a lot of articles. I use Audacity, which is a free program. I have a PC because that's what I do all my gaming on. And I built a computer with the intention of podcasting and also gaming. So I built a computer that I knew would be good for audio editing, or at least be capable of producing good audio. But Audacity has an extensive manual. It's a free program. You just have to be able to hunker down and read and figure out basics. Then I think the rest is really just experience too.
What is your podcasting highlight so far? Like favorite interview or best moment?
It's so hard because every interview is like so different. One interview was 3 hours long and I turned that into 3 episodes. It was my first ever interview. But I think that for how trying my episode at Newgrounds was in Philly with all of the issues with my mics and stuff, the experience itself, the interview was really good. Getting to go there and sit down in that conference room and just pick his brain was a really great experience as Tom Fulp. And I think that it was a lesson that I learned. And even though I was feeling a lot of other emotions besides the gratification of conducting that interview, it was ultimately a really positive experience. Those troubles and the anxiety I was feeling really weren't important in the long term. Like the gravity of that anxiety dissipated ultimately. That anxiety's gone that I had. And I'm left with just like a really fulfilling experience all around.
What is your dream for the future for your podcast, your show, or your personal future as a podcaster?
I hope I have the opportunity to continue producing the show. And I mean that in, I hope I have the opportunity to continue interviewing really great people who are interested in being on my show. I hope that I can expand the brand of my show. My goal is to start streaming regularly. And I would ultimately like to do it full time. I would love to produce my show full time, expand it into video of some sort. I have a lot of things that I really would like to do. Get a little ahead of myself. I'm really good at that.
I think that's good. It's good to be moving forward, but it's also like I have a tendency to want to do everything all at once and just like say, we're going to do this, and this. And it's easy to have nothing happen because you're completely overwhelmed when you try to make too much happen or put too much pressure on something that you love doing.
Definitely. If you listen to the early intros and outros of my early episodes, I've been talking about streaming regularly since the beginning. And I've been putting out episodes of my show for like a year now. And I did a 24-hour marathon for Extra Life. And then I think I streamed twice after that. So
wow.
I've done some, but I haven't lived up to the promises I've already made. So I'm like, I need to take a step back and reevaluate, like, what do I need to do to achieve the goals that I have been setting for myself before I move those goalposts back any further? I'm really good at continuing to move those goalposts back.
What is your best advice for a new or aspiring podcaster?
Go with the flow. I mean, have structure and have a goal. Know what you want and what you enjoy, but if you're on a journey and it takes you somewhere different than you expected, see what happens. You can't plan everything.
2 last questions. One, what's your favorite social media platform to connect with people?
I like Instagram and Twitter. I have a Facebook page for the show. I don't have like a group for my podcast, but I have a Discord that I made. I have a lot of things, but I would say Twitter probably is. If you're going to make me say one right now, Twitter.
And is your handle Katy Cakes?
Yeah, it's Katy, Katy, 2 underscores, Cakes, Kakes. 2 underscores because 1 underscore was taken.
Tricky.
Or you can look for my show at KakeBytes, and there's retweets of my personal account on there, and you can follow both.
Is there anything else that you want to share with our Podcast Envy listeners before we say goodbye?
I hope that you'll give my show a chance. It's not meant for just people who enjoy video games. If you like to just listen to people talk about something they're passionate about, and they don't only talk about video games, give it a shot. And if you don't like it, or if you like it, just let me know.
But don't leave a 1-star review.
I mean, if you think it's 1 star, at least give me some constructive feedback so I can make it better.
And I'll second that too, because even though I said that it wasn't something like video game history would not necessarily be something that I would naturally seek out. When I checked out the show, I actually was really interested to listen to a few of the episodes. And I think you had, was it 2 episodes that you had about something about violence in video games? Mm-hmm. Which is super relevant because I work with high school students. I mentor high school students, and they all do some kind of gaming. And it is a question, it's a question. It's something that's on our minds. And I wanted to say that too, that I got a ton of value from listening to your show.
Definitely. The episode on if video games cause violence in society, I talked with Patrick Scott Patterson, who is that historian that I worked with, about the history of that argument and how it's been made for literally as long as video games have been out. And so I'm really glad to hear that. And that's what I hope for. I have a whole episode on game-based learning and how video games can be used in education. And I speak with the CEO of a company called Triceum that literally just finished up a study and released the results actually today about the use of game-based learning courses, literal courses in colleges based around a video game that they created on art history and calculus. And the results showed some pretty staggering things, like compared to students who didn't play the game, the students who did play the game had almost 25% better comprehension of the materials, in this case of the calculus and the concepts associated with calculus, like a 25% increase in retention of that knowledge. And knowledge retention is, especially in courses like mathematics, is so important. And so I talked with Andre about that and with education. So, it's not always beer and video games, which sometimes we talk about that too. But that's fun about my show, I think, is that it kind of covers a lot of different aspects. And I hope to have the opportunity to talk to more really awesome people about things that I don't know about now. So that's part is just the learning. And that's what I want to share.
Podcast Envy is produced by your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. That's me. The Podcast Envy theme music is by Valentin Sosnitsky, courtesy of the Free Sound Project at freesound.org, and our podcast Angel music is by Benjamin Mastropolito, also on freesound.org as Lemon Cream. All music is licensed under the Creative Commons. Our episodes are mixed by Edwin Ruiz. And hey, if you want your show to sound as good as ours, hire us. Put the magic audio mojo of the Creative Imposter Studios to work for you. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to making your podcast the envy of everyone else.